Now, European financial leaders are again trying to work out details of a second bailout deal for Greece ahead of a key meeting tomorrow. But more and more people believe Greece cannot survive the severe austerity measures being demanded by Europe. Let's talk about this. Let's talk to the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. Also here in the studio with me, Martin Curring, an economist and editor of the Economist Intelligence Unit. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Nigel Farage, we're very clear on your position on this, but you've described recently that this is a situation of bullying and entrapment by a corrupt European system. There are many people going to these talks who don't feel it's that kind of a situation.
Well, just look at it. I mean, the elected Prime Minister of Greece, Papandreou, said, let's have a referendum and decide whether to stay in the euro or not. He was removed by the bully boys from Brussels, replaced by a man who is nothing more than a puppet Prime Minister. And there's a troika of 3 foreign bureaucrats who now effectively run the country. There are supposed to be general elections coming up in April of this year. And yet now the Greeks are being told that before the general election, they're asking the party leaders to sign up to a memorandum committing them to carrying on with the bailout policy. So in every way, Greece is being bullied. It's being told that if it was to leave the euro, it'd be the end of the world. And if you look at socially what is happening in Greece, 25% of firms have gone bust in the last 4 years. Youth unemployment is 50%. And all the ingredients are there for possibly even a revolution.
Okay, well, Martin Curring, when we talk about bullying, people often think that the heart of this bullying is Germany. But there are different motives, surely, apart from just bullying and entrapment, for Germany's concerns about what's happening in Greece.
Yes, that's definitely right. I mean, one thing is that Greece has already done a lot in terms of its fiscal austerity. They have reduced their budget deficit from around 15% to 10%. And these measures are absolutely necessary because there's a lot of competitiveness problems in Greece. I mean, the public sector is too large. Health spending is among the highest in the OECD countries. The ratio, for example, of doctors to patients is the highest in the OECD. So there are a lot of problems, structural problems in the country, and these fiscal austerity measures are actually necessary to improve the competitiveness, to bring down wages, to make the country more competitive.
But even if Greece is to carry out the package that's there in front of them, even then by 2020, they will have a greater level of indebtedness than Italy has got. And what is the social cost of this going to be? I mean, we have got genuine poverty growing in this country. We're not helping Greece, and the reason the Germans are doing this, I met with Angela Merkel in November. I said, why are you doing this? The German taxpayers don't want to pay. It's not helping the Greek economy. She said, Mr. Farage, we cannot let Greece leave the euro, because if we do, others will follow, and it will be the end of the European project. Isn't that what this is really all about?
It is about looking at it from a broader perspective, looking at the integrity of the Eurozone as a whole.
So they have to so the Greeks have to be sacrificed for the greater good
of
of the European project?
Not necessarily, because
if
we look at the consequence of Greece actually leaving the euro, they would have massive inflation problems. Their currency would depreciate.
Nigel Farage, that's an interesting point, because foreign exchange traders are saying, fine, we'll add another line to our screens, we'll add a drachma to it, it'll be simple, but it's not simple.
Well, I'm not saying that it'll be simple or painless. It's going to be painful whichever way we go. But note that in 2008, Iceland effectively went bankrupt, let a couple of its banks go, inflation soared, interest rates soared, their currency fell by 80%. Today, Iceland's credit rating has been upgraded by the agencies, and their forecast
is that a cultural, Martin Curring, is that a cultural question? Do the Icelandics have it within themselves to reorganise in that way, and the Greeks don't? I mean, only a brief look at 20th century history in Greece knows that certain things have just been left not dealt with, and that's part of the issue.
I'm not sure whether it's a cultural problem, but one thing is for sure. If Greece actually left the euro, it would have devastating consequences for Greece. And Greece has a competitive problems in itself. They have a very uncompetitive industrial sector. They need to improve competitiveness. They can do this in 2 ways. They could leave the euro, but the Greek exports are not very price sensitive. So it would take many, many years, maybe even decades, for Greek exports to be very competitive based on their exchange rate.
What about Greek imports? I tell you what, if in next weekend's Sunday newspapers we all read that Greek holidays were suddenly costing 70% less than they were this Sunday, I tell you what, millions of Brits would go to Greece. There'd be stimulus from that.
But that's a cheap shot, isn't it? It's not just about the tourist market.
Oh, the tourist market is a massive percentage of the Greek economy. A fifth of the Greek economy is the tourist market. And let's just remember that already the Greek economy has contracted by 14% since this crisis began. That is now accelerating. The projection is it will contract by a further 7% this year. It's notwithstandable. And on top of that, people's rights, their democracy has been robbed from them. That's why they were out in Athens last Sunday setting fire to things. And the ingredients are there for a disaster.
Look at the potential consequence for the banking sector. I mean, most of Greek banks, their assets are in euros. So if they were to lose the euro, their assets would be eroded, and then their liabilities would still be in euros, so the banking sector would collapse. And that would trigger a crisis within the whole eurozone. And it's also about households. Their households' savings are in euros. So if they lose the euro, there would be no consumer spending.
Come on. If you're a Greek with euros, you will be given a rate at which to convert it into drachmas, and we've seen that in other countries too.
Is there room for a B-level euro, a euro that can change value from the main euro being traded in the rest of Europe, a sort of euro B?
That's almost, it's very difficult to think about that at the moment. I mean, the risk of that actually happening has actually declined because the European Central Bank has intervened to protect other banks, but actually going for a stronger euro and a weaker, weaker currencies in other countries, it's very difficult to manage that carefully because there would be knock-on effects for banking. So it's almost impossible to think about this in a managed way. It would be catastrophic to come about because let's imagine Greece leaves the euro, then investors and households in Cyprus and Portugal would be very concerned. They might actually withdraw their euros as well, and that could lead to capital flight, banking runs, and there would be a major collapse potentially.
I think capital flight is the biggest problem the Greeks will face going back to the drachma, and I agree with that. And as good Europeans, we should help them and try and staunch that flow. But I think Greece will leave the euro. I think it's now inevitable. I hope it does so peaceably. I'm beginning to doubt it. I'm beginning to think there will actually be a revolution that will bring the government down in Greece, and maybe the Communist Party.
If we're talking precedence and contagion here, what kind of example does it set to other countries in the Mediterranean if Greece decides to do
Well, the Portuguese, of course, are looking at this very closely because as the Greeks are already being given massive debt write-downs on their private sector commitments, the Portuguese are saying, hang on, if they can have debt relief, why can't we? And I do predict that when the drachma comes back, and when suddenly we see money starting to flow back into Greece, the Portuguese will want the same. So maybe Angela Merkel's right. Maybe we'll finish up with a greater Deutschmark.
Martin Curry, final thought. People discuss at great length the motivation of this new Germany, East and West, put together, and it's the position it finds itself in as, if you like, the economic head of this massive partnership. What's the motivation amongst the new generation in Germany, the ones coming up, the business leaders of the next 20 years? Are they interested in a European Union, or are they looking elsewhere?
Well, it's actually quite interesting because around 57% of major business leaders actually recently said that they want Greece to be kicked out of the Eurozone. But maybe they should think twice, because if we look at Germany, they rely a lot on exports. The weak euros actually help Germany, so keeping the euro together is good for German business as well. And if they had their Deutschmark back, it would appreciate massively against other European currencies. So it wouldn't be in German.
But it sounds like you're talking about the next decade. What about the next 50 years? Aren't these young Prussian businessmen starting to look to Poland and Russia? Aren't they starting to explore other ways of making a living? There may not be this loyalty to this European experiment.
And India and China. We're moving into a global economy, and the EU increasingly is looking like a little backyard to German businessmen and British businessmen too.
OK, Nigel Farage and Martin Curry, thank you very much indeed for joining us, both of you, this afternoon.